The Art of Influence Without Manipulation. Written and published by Audiobook. Introduction. Influence is everywhere. In the words we choose. In the silences we leave behind. In how we make people feel, even when we're not trying. But here's the truth. We've been taught that influence is about control. About power. About getting someone to say yes, even if they mean no. We've seen it in business. In relationships. In marketing. In everyday conversations. And for many of us, that's why we pull back. Because we don't want to manipulate. We don't want to be that person. So instead, we stay silent. We dim our light. We hold our truth inside. But what if there's another way? What if real influence, ethical, heart-led influence, has nothing to do with control, and everything to do with connection? This book is not about persuasion tactics. It's not about clever phrasing or psychological tricks. It's about reclaiming influence as something honest, something empowering, something deeply human. Because the most powerful kind of influence isn't about changing someone's mind. It's about opening their heart. You may be wondering, what makes someone truly influential? It's not how loud they speak. It's not how smart they sound. It's not how many followers they have. It's their presence, their clarity, their integrity. It's how safe others feel around them. It's how deeply they listen. It's how much they respect the space between two people, without rushing to fill it with control. That's the kind of influence we'll uncover here. Throughout this audiobook, you'll hear stories of people who shaped lives, shifted rooms, and inspired change. Not by being forceful, but by being fully aligned. We'll explore the psychology behind ethical influence. From emotional safety and resonance, to trust building and narrative presence. You'll learn how to speak with clarity without overpowering. Ask questions that invite, not impose. Set boundaries that inspire respect. Lead without domination. And create change that begins with you. By the end of this journey, you won't just understand influence. You'll embody it. You'll become someone who walks into a room and doesn't need to push, because your presence already speaks. Someone whose words move people, not because they're polished, but because they're true. This isn't about learning how to convince. It's about learning how to be convictional. So let me ask you something. What would shift in your life if people didn't just listen to your words, but felt your truth? Let's find out. Chapter 1. The Power in the Pause. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you paused? In a conversation. In a negotiation. In a moment that felt tense or uncertain. Not because you didn't know what to say, but because you chose to wait. Because here's what most people miss about influence. It doesn't start with what you say. It starts with what you don't. Silence is not absence. It's not weakness. It's not a void to be filled. It's presence. And presence is where true influence begins. I want to tell you about Elias. Elias was a corporate strategist. Sharp, articulate, respected for his insights. But early in his career, he had one habit that always held him back. He rushed. He filled every gap with words. Felt pressure to always have the answer. Mistook speed for authority. Until one day, in a high-stakes negotiation, his mentor pulled him aside and said, "Your voice is strong, but your silence is missing." At first, he didn't understand. But that afternoon, during a tense boardroom discussion, he tried something different. He paused. Instead of countering every point, he let silence settle in. And what happened next changed everything. The room leaned in. People softened. Tension eased. And Elias realized. The pause didn't weaken his presence. It amplified it. Before we go on, if this story is opening your eyes, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel. It helps us reach more souls just like yours. Here's the truth. When you pause, you communicate 3 powerful things. You are listening. You are thoughtful. You are in control, not of others, but of yourself. And that control, that self-regulation, it creates safety. Because influence, at its core, is not about pushing. It's about creating space. And space is what most conversations are missing. Psychologically, this pause is called a regulatory break. It gives your brain space to process emotions. It calms your nervous system. It allows you to access empathy, reason, and intuition. In communication, it sends a signal. I'm here. I'm aware. I'm not just reacting, I'm relating. And that changes everything. Let me tell you about Imani. Imani was a therapist. But before that, she was a teacher. And before that, a trauma survivor. She had learned early on that words could be weapons. Sharp, fast, defensive. So as she healed, she made a vow to herself. I will never speak from fear again. She practiced slowing down, noticing her breath, pausing before every response. At first, people didn't know what to make of it. But eventually, they began to trust her more. Because her calm presence made them feel safe. Seen. Held. That was her influence. Not her words. Her energy. And her energy came from the pause. You may be wondering, isn't silence risky? Yes. Because silence reveals who's actually comfortable being present. And many people aren't. They rush to fill the air because they fear what might rise if they don't. But in silence, truth surfaces. And when you learn to sit in it, you begin to guide conversations instead of chase them. Here's something to reflect on. What if you didn't rush to answer? What if you let the moment stretch, just a little, before you responded? What would shift in how others receive you? Chances are, they'd lean in, not away. The pause gives you power. Not over people, but over your presence. And presence. That's the kind of influence that lingers. Not because it's loud, but because it's real. Chapter 2. The influence of listening without fixing. Let me ask you something. When someone shares their pain with you, what's your first instinct? Do you offer advice? Search for a solution? Try to make it go away? You're not alone. Most of us have been taught to fix, to respond, to help. But here's the truth. Fixing is not the same as listening. And listening, deep, attuned, heart-led listening, is one of the most underrated forms of influence in the world. Let me tell you about Marin. Marin was a manager at a mid-sized non-profit. Every week, her team came to her with challenges, burnout, stress, conflict. And every time, Marin jumped into problem-solving mode. She gave advice, made suggestions, wrote follow-up emails with action steps. But something felt off. Despite her best efforts, her team still seemed disconnected, withdrawn, unmotivated. One day, a junior team member, Hannah, stayed after a meeting. And she said something Marin never forgot. Sometimes, I don't need answers. I just need you to be with me, where I am. That sentence stopped Marin in her tracks. Because she realized, she had been so busy trying to help, that she hadn't truly been with her people. Before we dive deeper, if this chapter is already resonating with you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share the channel. You never know who needs this reminder too. Here's the truth. When someone opens up to you, they're not always asking for solutions. They're asking to be seen, to be heard, to be felt. Real influence happens in those moments. Not when you fix, but when you witness. When you hold space for someone's experience, without trying to clean it up. That's where trust grows. That's where loyalty forms. That's where people feel safe enough to change. Psychologists call this reflective listening. It's the practice of being fully present with someone. Not to respond, but to reflect back what you're hearing with empathy and care. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of the body that calms us, softens us, and opens us to connection. When we're truly listened to, our defenses drop, our creativity rises, and we feel emotionally held. That, in itself, is transformative. Let me tell you about Daniel and his son, Jonah. Jonah was 13. Quiet. Withdrawn. Daniel tried everything to get through. Advice. Motivational speeches. Solutions. But it never landed. One evening, Jonah sat at the dinner table in silence. Tears welled in his eyes. Instead of asking what was wrong, Daniel stayed quiet. And when Jonah finally spoke, Daniel didn't interrupt, didn't fix, didn't offer a strategy. He just listened. And when Jonah finished, Daniel said, "Thank you for telling me. That sounds really hard." That night was the turning point. Because for the first time, Jonah felt safe. Not because his dad had an answer, but because he finally had space. You may be wondering, if I don't fix the problem, am I being passive? No. You're being powerful in a different way. Listening without fixing communicates. I trust your ability to grow. I believe in your resilience. I'm here to hold space, not control your journey. And that belief, that quiet trust, that's what helps people rise. Here's something to try. Next time someone opens up to you, ask this. Do you want support, solutions, or just someone to listen? That question alone can change the dynamic. It gives them autonomy. It gives you clarity. It builds connection. Chapter 2 Wrap-up. Real influence is not about fixing people. It's about being with people. Your ability to listen without rushing to repair is one of the most sacred gifts you can offer. It says, I won't rescue you from your pain, but I will sit with you inside it, until you feel strong enough to stand again. That's not weakness. That's leadership. And the world doesn't need more noise. It needs more space, more safety, more listening. And that begins with you. Chapter 3. The invisible impact of emotional safety. Let me ask you something. Have you ever shared a vulnerable truth, only to feel it wasn't received with care? Maybe someone laughed, or brushed it off, or gave advice when you really needed silence. What did you do after that? You pulled back. You tucked your truth back inside. You told yourself, never again. And this is where we begin. Because real influence, deep, lasting, human influence, can't exist without one essential foundation. Emotional safety. It's invisible, intangible, but it changes everything. It's the quiet permission to be seen, without fear. To speak, without being dismissed. To exist, without needing to explain or defend yourself. And when emotional safety is present, people open. They soften. They trust. But when it's missing, they shut down. They disconnect. They protect instead of connect. Let me tell you about Celine. Celine led a creative team at a fast-paced media company. Her team was talented, but guarded. Ideas stayed surface level. No one took creative risks. One day, Celine pulled everyone into a meeting. She didn't have an agenda. Just a question. When was the last time you felt safe taking a creative risk at work? At first, silence. Then someone said, I'm scared to say the wrong thing in front of you. Another added, I never know if our ideas will be shut down or built up. Celine didn't defend herself. Didn't get defensive. She paused, breathed, then said, Thank you. I didn't realize I'd created that atmosphere. But I hear you now, and I want to do better. That meeting didn't fix everything, but it opened a door. Because emotional safety isn't built with policies. It's built with presence. Let's pause here. If this resonates, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share the channel. It helps bring more of these conversations into the spaces that need them. Back to the heart of it. So, what actually creates emotional safety? According to decades of psychological research, it comes down to a few key behaviors. A non-judgmental presence. People need to know they won't be shamed for their truth. Predictability. Consistency builds trust. Emotional safety requires stability. Active validation. Even if you disagree with someone's experience, you acknowledge that it's real to them. Transparency. People feel safer when they're not guessing what you're really thinking. When these conditions are met, influence flows. Not because people are being pushed, but because they feel safe enough to move. Let me tell you about Jordan. Jordan worked in HR. For years, He believed professionalism meant emotional distance. But when the pandemic hit, his team started unraveling. People needed more than structure. They needed humanity. So he began every meeting with a check-in. How's your heart today? Not how's your work. Not how's the project. But how's your heart? At first, it felt awkward. But over time, people started sharing. A sick parent, a rough night, a small joy, and something shifted. The team got closer, more engaged, more loyal. Why? Because someone had made space for them to be human first, and employees second. You may be wondering, if emotional safety is invisible, how do I know it's working? Look for this. Are people speak up more? Are they ask harder questions? Are they offer more ideas? Are they admit mistakes faster? Are they recover from conflict quicker? Are they stay? Because emotional safety is not soft. It's strategic. It fuels innovation, loyalty, resilience, influence. Here's something you can do right now. Think about the spaces you lead, love, or live in. Ask yourself, have I made it safe for others to be real around me? Not just comfortable, but real. And if the answer is no, start small. Say, I want you to know it's okay to be honest here. I may not always get it right, but I want to listen. Your voice matters, even when it's hard to hear. That language? It builds something no title ever could. Chapter 4, Influence Without Control. Let me ask you something. Have you ever wanted something so badly? A yes, a change, a response, that you found yourself trying to steer someone there? You didn't mean to control. But the pressure, the urgency, the fear of not getting what you hoped for, took over. And suddenly, what began as honest influence turned into subtle control. Here's the truth. The line between influence and control is thin. So thin, most people don't know they've crossed it. Influence says, I offer something. You choose. Control says, I lead you toward my outcome, whether you feel it or not. And that distinction? It changes everything. Let me tell you about Ash. Ash was a life coach, passionate, driven, gifted in helping people see their blind spots. But one of his clients, Lena, wasn't moving fast enough. Week after week, she brought up the same fear. And Ash got frustrated. He started leading her harder, pushing her to act, calling out her resistance. Until one day she said, I don't feel safe anymore. I feel like you're trying to force me into your version of progress. Ash was stunned. He wasn't trying to manipulate. He cared. But care without consent becomes pressure. And pressure kills trust. That day, he learned. The more he tried to control the outcome, the more he lost his influence. Let's pause here. If this speaks to something you've experienced, either as the one pushing or the one being pushed, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Someone else may need the reminder. That influence can be gentle and still powerful. Back to the truth. Influence, real influence, requires surrender. Not surrender of values. Not surrender of clarity. But surrender of attachment. The willingness to guide. Without gripping. The willingness to plant seeds. Without demanding the harvest on your timeline. It's leadership with open hands. In psychology, this is tied to the concept of autonomy support. It means creating space for someone to move from internal motivation, rather than external pressure. When people feel their autonomy is respected, they're more likely to reflect deeply, commit long-term, own their choices, change from the inside out. But when they feel controlled, even if your intentions are pure, they resist. They may comply on the outside, but disconnect on the inside. And that's not influence. That's control dressed in charm. Let me tell you about Layla and her daughter, Noor. Noor was 17. Smart, sensitive, and quietly struggling with what to do after high school. Layla wanted the best for her. College, structure, safety. She asked questions, offered resources, scheduled meetings. But Noor began pulling away. Not out of rebellion, but because she felt unseen. One evening, Layla sat on her bed and said, "I've been pushing too hard. Not because I don't trust you, but because I'm scared. I love you so much. I forgot that this is your path to walk." Tears filled Noor's eyes. "That's all I needed," she whispered. "To know you see me. Not just your hope for me." That moment didn't resolve everything, but it repaired the bridge. Because influence without control feels like freedom, and freedom invites honesty. You may be wondering, how do I guide someone without pushing? Start here. Speak from your values, not your fears. Invite, don't impose. Say, "Would you be open to," instead of "you need to." Ask more than you advise. Stay rooted in curiosity. Tell me what this feels like for you. Trust the timing. Growth isn't always linear. Trust what unfolds. When people feel respected in their pace and power, they move further, and with more integrity. Here's something to reflect on. Am I influencing, or am I subtly controlling? Ask that with compassion, not shame. And if the answer is uncomfortable, let that discomfort become your teacher. Because the less you push, the more your presence can pull. Chapter 5. The Quiet Authority of Integrity. Let me ask you something. Have you ever met someone whose words were soft, but their presence felt undeniable? They didn't raise their voice. They didn't push their agenda. They didn't need applause. And yet, when they spoke, people listened. That's not charisma. That's not strategy. That's integrity. And integrity is one of the most magnetic forms of influence there is. Integrity isn't about perfection. It's about congruence. When what you say matches what you do. When your values show up in your actions, especially when no one is watching. It's quiet, but it echoes. Because people may forget your words, but they never forget how consistently you live them. Let me tell you about Jalen. Jalen was a nurse in an intensive care unit. He wasn't loud. He wasn't the most decorated or promoted. But he was trusted. Not just by patients, but by every doctor, nurse, and family member who crossed his path. Why? Because he was the same person in every room. Compassionate, grounded, responsible. When things went wrong, he owned his mistakes. When tensions ran high, he stayed calm. And when no one was watching, he was still doing the right thing. One night, a new nurse asked him, "How do you lead without trying to lead?" And Jalen smiled. "I don't try to lead," he said. "I just try to stay honest with myself, no matter who's in the room." That's the power of integrity. Before we go on, if you're finding clarity in this message, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Integrity grows when more voices rise with it. Here's the truth. You can say all the right things, use all the right tools, quote all the right experts. But if your actions don't match your message, people feel it. They may not call it out, but they sense it. Because influence without integrity is just manipulation dressed in performance. There's a psychological term for this. It's called moral authority. It's not about having power over others. It's about having alignment within yourself. People with moral authority speak only what they believe, admit when they're wrong, make decisions based on principle, not pressure, lead by example, quietly, consistently, and clearly. They don't need a stage. They are the message. Let me tell you about Marisol. Marisol was a high school counselor. Every year, students flooded her office. Not because she fixed everything, but because she never pretended to. One afternoon, a student named Kevin broke down crying. He had cheated on an exam and didn't know what to do. Marisol looked at him and said, "Do you know why people trust me? Not because I'm perfect, but because I don't ask others to be honest with things I wouldn't say myself." Kevin wiped his face, sat up straighter, and asked if he could make things right. He did. And the next year, he came back just to say thank you. Because her integrity gave him permission to find his own. You may be wondering, what does integrity look like in everyday life? It looks like A saying I don't know, when you don't. A saying I was wrong, when you are. A saying that's not okay with me, when something crosses your line. A saying yes, when you mean it, and no, when you don't. It's walking away from shortcuts. It's staying steady when it's easier to sway. It's telling the truth, even when it costs you something. Because every time you do, you build credibility, resonance, power. The kind that doesn't shout, because it doesn't need to. Here's a simple practice. Before you speak, ask, is this aligned with what I live? If someone followed me silently for a day, would they see this in action? If the answer is yes, speak it. If the answer is no, pause. Reflect. Recenter. Because your greatest influence doesn't come from what you say in the spotlight. It comes from who you are in the silence. Chapter 6. The Art of Asking Questions That Unlock People. Let me ask you something. When was the last time someone asked you a question that stopped you mid-thought and made you feel seen? Not small talk, not surface-level curiosity, but a real question. The kind that opens you. Softly, powerfully, unexpectedly. Questions, when asked with care, aren't just tools for gathering information. They're instruments of transformation. Because the right question can unlock someone's truth faster than any advice ever could. Influence, real influence, isn't about having all the answers. It's about having the right questions. The kind that interrupt autopilot, invite vulnerability, reveal self-awareness, and make people feel known, not analyzed. That's the difference between interrogation and invitation. And when you master that difference, you become someone people open to, without even realizing why. Let me tell you about Emmett. Emmett was an executive coach. He worked with high-level leaders, people who were always in control of the conversation. One day, during a session, his client, Lena, rambled for 15 minutes about productivity issues in her team. Most coaches would have offered a strategy, a framework, a plan. But Emmett leaned in and asked, what's something you haven't told them, because you're scared they'll stop trusting you? Lena froze. Her eyes filled with tears. And she said, I don't trust myself, so I keep trying to earn theirs. That was the breakthrough. Not because he told her what was wrong, but because he asked something that reached beneath the surface. That's the art of influence through inquiry. Let's pause for a moment. If this idea speaks to the kind of communicator you want to become, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share the channel. This might be the permission someone else needs to ask deeper, better questions too. Here's the truth. Most conversations stay shallow because the questions are rehearsed. How's work? How have you been? What's new? They're safe, expected, but rarely meaningful. But when you learn to ask questions that pierce the surface, you give people permission to reveal the version of themselves they actually want to share. There's a concept in psychology called open-ended questioning. These are questions that don't seek a specific answer. They seek insight. They sound like, what's been heavy for you lately? What would you say if you weren't afraid of being misunderstood? What truth are you tired of carrying alone? What's something no one ever asks you, but you wish they would? These questions don't solve. They soften. And in that softening, real connection grows. Let me tell you about Brenna and her father, Martin. Martin was a military man. Stoic. Reserved. Emotionally unreadable. Brenna had spent years trying to connect with him through facts, stories, even conflict. Nothing worked. Until one day, sitting on the porch, she asked softly, Dad, what's something you never gave yourself permission to feel? The silence that followed felt like forever. Then he said, grief. He talked for over an hour. About war. About family. About things he had buried so deeply he forgot they were still inside. That day changed their relationship. Not because Brenna found the right words, but because she asked the right question. You may be wondering, how do I ask better questions without feeling intrusive? Here's how. Start from genuine curiosity. Not to diagnose, but to understand. Follow emotion, not just logic. If someone's eyes shift or their voice softens, lean in there. Respect pace. A deep question offered with care builds intimacy. One asked too soon builds walls. Be silent after asking. Let the question breathe. Don't rush to fill the space. And most of all, ask questions not to get answers, but to build bridges. Here's a reflection for your own growth. What's one question I wish someone would ask me? That would help me reveal who I really am? Now imagine becoming the kind of person who gives that gift to others. Over and over again. Chapter 7. How to be convincing without being forceful. Let me ask you something. Have you ever tried to share your perspective, only to feel the other person pulling away? You weren't shouting. You weren't wrong. But somehow, it felt like the more you spoke, the less they heard. You walked away wondering, why didn't that land? Here's the truth. Being right isn't what makes you convincing. Being forceful doesn't make you powerful. And raising your voice doesn't raise your influence. Because the most convincing people in the world aren't the ones who push. They're the ones who invite. Let me tell you about Myra. Myra was a wellness coach. Empathetic. Wise. But during sessions, she often felt like she was convincing her clients to change. She brought the research, the logic, the passion. But change rarely happened. One day, her mentor said, "Stop trying to push the river. Just clear the path." It didn't make sense at first. But slowly, she understood. Convincing isn't about pushing someone toward your truth. It's about creating space for them to find their own. So she stopped speaking to be persuasive. She started speaking to be present. And everything changed. Let's pause here. If this resonates, if you've ever felt exhausted trying to make your truth stick, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share this channel. Your voice doesn't need to shout. It needs to resonate. So what makes someone truly convincing? It's not volume, not dominance, not slick words. It's alignment. It's calm conviction. It's emotional regulation. When your energy is grounded, your message becomes magnetic. Not because you're louder, but because you're clearer. People don't follow intensity. They follow stability. Psychologists call this non-coercive influence. It's the ability to lead without force, to persuade without pressure, to guide without gripping the outcome. It creates buy-in, not resistance. Because it honors people's autonomy, while offering something centered and true. Let me tell you about Amir and his friend, Caleb. Caleb was struggling with addiction. Everyone around him gave ultimatums, advice, pressure. Amir tried a different path. One day, he sat beside him and said, "I'm not here to change you. But if you ever decide you want something different, I'm here. No judgment. Just love." Caleb didn't respond. Not at first. But 6 months later, he called. "Are you still there?" he asked. Amir replied, "Always was." That's the power of influence without force. It doesn't demand the door open. It waits by it, with truth in hand. You may be wondering, how do I share what matters without coming across as pushy or intense? Start here. Speak from experience, not ego. Say, "Here's what I found helpful," instead of "you should." Drop the agenda. Let go of needing them to change right now. Use calm confidence. A centered tone lands deeper than urgency. Ask for permission. Say, "Would you be open to another way of seeing this?" Release the outcome. Your job isn't to control the decision, just to offer truth with love. When people feel free to decide, they're far more open to considering. Here's a practice. Before a difficult conversation, ask yourself, am I attached to this person agreeing with me? Or am I here to offer truth that honors their freedom? If it's the second, you're already becoming more influential than you know. Chapter 8. The Influence of Consistent Character. Let me ask you something. Who comes to mind when you think of someone you deeply trust? Not because they always agree with you, not because they have all the answers, but because, no matter the moment, you know who they are. You know how they'll show up, what they'll stand for, where their line is. That's not luck. That's not charisma. That's character. And in the long game of influence, character beats charm every time. Here's the truth. Your character is your invisible reputation. It walks into the room before you do. It speaks even when you're silent. It builds trust in moments when words fall short. People may admire your skill, but they follow your character. Because what's consistent feels safe, and what feels safe becomes influential. Let me tell you about Elise. Elise was a small-town principal. Not flashy, not loud, but when something happened, anything from a school fight to a community tragedy, people called her first. Why? Because she was predictable in her presence. She didn't react. She responded. She didn't perform. She showed up over and over again. Calm, direct, compassionate. One parent once said, "I may not always agree with Elise, but I never have to guess who I'm getting." That's influence. Rooted not in power, but in character stability. Let's pause for a moment. If this is helping you define the kind of leader, friend, or human you want to be, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share the channel. In a world chasing followers, let's build something deeper, character worth following. Let's get honest. We live in a culture that rewards performance. Flash, image, first impressions. But in real life, it's not the first impression that shapes trust. It's the 5th, the 15th, the 50th. Character is influence you don't have to announce. It's what people feel when you leave the room, and what they repeat when your name is mentioned. Psychologically, this is rooted in reliability bias. We are more likely to trust, follow, and be influenced by people who behave consistently over time. This doesn't mean perfection. It means predictability. If you say what you mean, and do what you say, people remember. And more importantly, they lean in. Because character is clarity. And clarity creates confidence. Let me tell you about DeAndre. He was a youth mentor in an underserved community. Every Thursday at 4 p.m., he showed up. Rain or shine. Exhausted or energized. He was there. Not just when it was convenient. Not just when he was praised. He showed up because he said he would. Years later, one of the young men he mentored stood on stage at his college graduation and said, "DeAndre didn't change my life with a speech. He changed it by showing up every week, exactly who he said he was." That is the kind of influence that outlives applause. You may be wondering, how do I build character that actually influences others? Start with this. Be the same person in every room. Don't shapeshift for approval. Own your flaws, not just your strengths. Humility is part of consistency. Speak truth even when it's unpopular. People trust those who don't fold under pressure. Don't just show up big, show up repeatedly. Influence isn't about the one big moment. It's about 1,000 small ones. When you mess up, repair it. Integrity isn't about never falling. It's about rising the right way. Because the most trustworthy people aren't perfect. They are predictable in their values. Here's a reflection to anchor this. When someone hears your name, what do you hope they feel? Not what they say. Not how they rank you. But what they feel. Peace? Respect? Trust? Relief? Let that answer shape how you move. Every day. Especially when no one's watching. Chapter 9. How to disagree and still be respected. Let me ask you something. Have you ever disagreed with someone and walked away feeling smaller, not stronger? Like you lost ground. Like the relationship cracked a little. Like respect left the room. Now ask yourself this. Have you ever seen someone disagree? With grace? With clarity? With dignity? And somehow, even in opposition, they earned more respect, not less? That's the art of disagreement. Not as conflict, but as connection with boundaries. Here's the truth. Disagreement is inevitable, but disrespect is optional. We live in a world where disagreement often means division. We're taught to pick a side, to win the argument, to prove the point. But in real influence, the goal isn't to win. It's to preserve the relationship while honoring your truth. Because people won't always agree with you, but they will remember how you made them feel in the disagreement. Let me tell you about Raymond. Raymond was a city council member in a deeply divided town. At a town hall, 2 residents stood up and challenged his proposal. Publicly, passionately, aggressively. The room tensed. Raymond didn't interrupt. He didn't defend. He waited. Then he said, "I hear your frustration. And even though we don't see this the same way, you deserve a space where your voice matters." Then he shared his side. Not to crush the opposition, but to clarify his values. People didn't clap. They nodded. And many who disagreed with his plan walked away with deeper respect for the man behind it. That's disagreement done well. Let's pause for a moment. If you're tired of watching truth and compassion fall apart in arguments, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Let's normalize disagreement that builds, instead of breaks. So how do you disagree in a way that preserves connection? You anchor in a few key truths. Disagreement doesn't mean disconnection. Your goal isn't to change their mind, it's to show yours clearly. Respect isn't earned by being right. It's earned by being respectful while you're real. Disagreement becomes influence when it's delivered with grounded confidence, not emotional domination. There's a communication skill called assertive dialogue. It's the ability to say, "Here's what I think. Here's how I feel. Here's what I need." Without blaming, without labeling, without shrinking. It's standing with your truth, not on someone else's. That's what makes it powerful and rare. Let me tell you about Isla and her brother, Dev. They'd always been close, until politics tore them apart. Every dinner turned into a debate. Every text thread ended in tension. Until one night, Isla said, "I think we're trying to win something, instead of trying to understand each other." So she changed the rhythm. The next time Dev spoke his view, she said, "Tell me more. Not so I can change you, but so I can see where it lives in you." That moment softened everything, because she made space for disagreement, without making the relationship unsafe. That's what respect in conflict looks like. You may be wondering, what if they don't return the respect? You stand in yours anyway, because influence isn't about reciprocity. It's about integrity in motion. You can't control their tone, but you can own your delivery. And every time you model healthy disagreement, you give others permission to rise to your level. Some won't, but the ones who matter will. Here's a practice. Next time you disagree, try saying, "We may not see this the same way, and that's okay. Can I share where I'm coming from without trying to convince you? What would it look like for us to disagree and still walk away feeling heard?" Simple language, profound impact. Chapter 10. Creating influence that lasts beyond the moment. Let me ask you something. What if the most powerful thing you ever said wasn't remembered for its cleverness, but for how it lingered? Not because it made someone clap, but because it made someone think. Not because it echoed in the room, but because it echoed in their life. That's the difference between influence that fades and influence that lasts. We live in a culture of immediacy. Quick wins, viral moments, loud opinions. But real influence? It's not built in a moment. It's built in meaning. Because the words that matter most aren't the ones that trend. They're the ones that transform. Let me tell you about Rima. Rima was a speaker. She'd built a career on workshops, keynotes, panels. She was articulate, insightful, always polished. But one day, after a talk, a woman walked up to her and said, "What you said was brilliant, but what you didn't say hit even harder." Confused, Rima asked what she meant. The woman smiled and said, "You paused. You looked down. And in that silence, I saw your real self. That moment gave me permission to be mine." Rima realized something vital. Her greatest influence hadn't come from her notes. It had come from her presence. Because when presence aligns with purpose, People feel it beyond the words. Let's pause for a moment. If you've ever felt the pressure to always say more to matter, take a breath. And if this chapter is helping you shift that belief, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Your impact may not be loud, but it can still be lasting. Here's the truth. Influence that lasts isn't about what you control in the moment. It's about what you plant. It's about asking, did I make them feel seen? Did I leave them more honest than I found them? Did I model something they can carry? Because short-term influence aims to impress, but long-term influence aims to empower. There's a concept in psychology called internalization. It means someone not only hears your message, they adopt it, integrate it, own it as part of their identity. That only happens when what you say feels authentic. Your message is consistent over time. You care more about the person than their agreement. When people feel you're not trying to get something from them, but give something to them, they trust you. And trust is the soil where legacy grows. Let me tell you about Nolan. Nolan wasn't famous. He didn't have a platform. He was a janitor at a local high school for 30 years. But ask any student who passed through that building, and they'll tell you Nolan mattered. He knew their names. He asked real questions. He offered kindness when it was least expected. Years later, at his retirement ceremony, dozens of grown adults stood to speak. Not about what he said, but about who he was. Because Nolan had left a mark. A quiet, consistent, meaningful influence. That didn't need a spotlight to shine. You may be wondering, what can I do today to build influence that lasts? Start with this. Prioritize consistency over intensity. Don't aim to wow. Aim to be real again and again. Speak from intention, not performance. Say less, but make it matter. Let people feel safe around your presence. Safety deepens memory. Model what you teach. If your values don't show up in your behavior, your words won't land. Detach from applause. You don't need a crowd to build a legacy. Influence is less about what people remember, and more about what they become because they met you. Here's a reflection. If no one praised me, if no one reposted me, if no one clapped, would I still say the same truth? Would I still live the same values? If yes, you're already creating influence that doesn't expire. Chapter 11. How to influence without saying a word. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been around someone who didn't say much, but changed the atmosphere the moment they walked in? You felt calmer, more seen, more steady, and they hadn't spoken a word. That's not magic. That's not coincidence. That is presence. And presence, real, grounded, non-performative presence, is one of the most powerful forms of influence you will ever embody. Here's the truth. We've been conditioned to believe that influence is about what we say. The quotes, the voice, the delivery. But the deepest kind of influence lives in the space between the words. The quiet, the consistency, the energy you carry when nothing is being said at all. Because people may remember your words, but they will feel your presence. And presence doesn't require volume. It requires alignment. Let me tell you about Ezra. Ezra was a hospice nurse. He didn't speak often. He didn't need to, because when a family was breaking down in grief, he just sat a day, listened, breathed slowly, stayed close. One day, a daughter whose father had just passed whispered to him, "You didn't say anything, but I felt more held by your silence than all the words I've heard this week." That's influence without sound. That's what happens when who you are speaks louder than what you say. Let's pause for a moment. If this resonates with the way you want to show up in the world, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Not all influence is spoken. Some of it is simply felt. Let's go deeper. What actually creates wordless influence? It's not charisma. It's internal congruence. When your inner world is calm, clear, and centered, people sense it. When your body language matches your integrity, people trust it. When your energy says you're safe here, people stay. There's a principle in psychology called co-regulation. It means that nervous systems sync. Literally. If your energy is regulated, grounded, non-anxious, steady, the people around you feel it, even if they don't understand it. You don't have to give a speech. You just have to be present with intention. That's how children calm in a parent's arms. That's how leaders diffuse a tense room. That's how healers, mentors, and elders create transformation, just by entering the space. They don't dominate. They anchor. Let me tell you about Jayla. Jayla ran a community center. She rarely gave long talks. She rarely raised her voice. But when conflict broke out, people turned to her, instinctively. One afternoon, two teenagers got into a heated argument. Jayla walked over, placed her hand gently on the table, and said nothing. Within seconds, both teens sat down. Breathing slowed. Tears came. And one of them whispered, "You didn't even say anything. But I knew I needed to stop." Jayla's power wasn't in her volume. It was in her vibration. And that's something no microphone can amplify. You may be wondering, how can I cultivate that kind of silent influence? Here's how. Regulate your own nervous system. Breath work. Stillness. Pause before entering rooms. A lead with your presence, not your performance. Show up grounded, not grand. A let go of the need to be heard. Some of your greatest influence will come when you're just fully there. A focus on being congruent. Let your posture, eye contact, and energy say, "You matter. I'm here." Practice being with discomfort without trying to fix it. Influence doesn't always solve. It sometimes just sits beside. Here's a reflection for the quiet leaders. If you couldn't speak for a week, how would people experience your presence? Would they feel calmer? More clear? More whole? If the answer is yes, your influence is already deeper than you realize. Chapter 12. The Influence of Vulnerability and Truth. Let me ask you something. When was the last time someone told you the truth? Not the polished version. Not the brave face version. But the real, messy, vulnerable truth? And instead of shrinking them, it made you lean in? That's not weakness. That's power. Because vulnerability, contrary to everything we were taught, isn't the opposite of influence. It's the engine of it. Here's the truth. We've been conditioned to believe that influence comes from having it all together. A steady voice. A solid plan. An unshakable image. But real influence doesn't come from looking perfect. It comes from being real. Because when you speak from your truth, you give others permission to speak from theirs. That's how movements begin. That's how healing happens. That's how trust is built. Let me tell you about Matteo. Matteo was a pastor. Loved by many. Respected in his community. But for years, he carried silent depression. Every week, he preached hope, but went home to darkness. Until one Sunday, mid-sermon, he paused, looked out across the congregation and said, "I need to tell you something. I've been hurting. And I've been hiding it." The room went still. Then something incredible happened. People began crying, whispering to each other, coming forward, not to console him, but to join him, because one person's vulnerability had opened a floodgate of truth no one had dared to unlock. That's influence, born from bravery. Let's pause for a moment. If you've been afraid that showing your truth would cost you respect, please like, subscribe, and share this message. Because someone else needs to hear that honesty doesn't make you smaller. It makes you seen. There's a term in psychology called authentic self-disclosure. It's the intentional act of sharing something real. Not to get attention, but to build connection. When done with care, it builds trust, empathy, relatability, an influence that lasts far beyond the moment. And when someone feels like you've told the truth, they don't just hear you. They feel you. They believe you. Because you're no longer speaking at them. You're standing with them. Let me tell you about Kira. Kira was the youngest team leader in her company. Bright, bold, strategic, but also terrified of being seen as inexperienced. So she overcompensated, overworked, overexplained, until one day, during a high-stakes meeting, she fumbled. Words didn't land. The proposal fell flat. And instead of deflecting, she said, "I want to name what's real. I'm nervous. I care deeply about this team. And I'm still growing into this role." Silence. Then, applause. Because her truth wasn't weakness. It was trustworthiness. From that day on, people didn't just follow her ideas. They followed her. You may be wondering, isn't vulnerability risky? Yes. But here's the deeper question. What does it cost you to never be fully seen? To live behind the mask? To speak through filters? To lead from fear? That cost is quiet, but brutal. And what you gain from vulnerability? Freedom, connection, influence that can't be faked. Here's how to begin. Start small. You don't have to spill everything. Start with one honest sentence. Check your motive. Ask, am I sharing this to connect, or to be rescued? A share from scars, not open wounds. Let your truth be grounded, not raw. Hold your center. You don't need to over-explain your emotions. You just need to own them. Let silence follow your honesty. It's not your job to manage how others receive your truth. Because the right people, they won't run. They'll lean in. Here's a reflection for your voice. What part of me have I been hiding? That, if shared gently, could bring someone else closer to themselves? Speak that. Live that. Not loudly, but truthfully. Chapter 13. Influence without expectation. Let me ask you something. Have you ever poured your heart into a conversation, only to walk away disappointed? Maybe they didn't respond the way you hoped, didn't shift, didn't thank you, didn't change. And you thought to yourself, was it even worth it? It's a hard truth to face, but it's the truth behind real influence. If your impact depends on the outcome, you're not leading, you're bargaining. Here's the truth. Most of us carry hidden expectations when we speak. We want validation, agreement, change, reaction. But when you tie your worth or effort to how someone responds, you give your power away. Because influence isn't about control. It's about offering something freely. Your insight, your presence, your truth. And then, letting go. Let me tell you about Rhea. Rhea worked with youth in the foster system. Every day, she gave her energy, her time, her heart. But for months, one boy, Derek, refused to engage. She tried stories. She tried silence. She tried patience. Still, nothing. Then one day, she said this to herself. I'm here to plant seeds, not to demand blooms. And from that day forward, she showed up without the need to be seen. She loved him anyway, spoke gently anyway, listened anyway. 2 years later, Derek sent her a letter. You didn't expect me to change for you to stay. That's what made me trust you. That's influence. Freed from expectation. Rooted in presence. Let's pause for a moment. If you've ever been exhausted by unmet outcomes, please like, subscribe, and share this message. Because someone else out there needs to be reminded. You can still make a difference. Even when the difference takes time. Let's go deeper. Expectation and influence don't mix well. Why? Because expectation carries subtle pressure. It says, I'll be kind, if you grow. I'll share my story, if you thank me. I'll show up, if you change. But influence without expectation? That's love in action. It's being rooted enough to say, I offer this, without needing anything in return. That's not weakness. It's freedom. In psychology, this is aligned with the idea of non-attachment. It's not apathy. It's not indifference. It's the ability to engage fully and still release the outcome. This mindset allows you to lead without burnout, influence without resentment, love without strings, serve without self-erasure. Because your influence is no longer conditional. It becomes unshakable. Let me tell you about Omar and his brother, Tariq. Tariq was in and out of recovery. cycles of relapse, years of disappointment. And Omar, his older brother, kept trying to fix it. One day, his therapist said, "What would it look like to love him without trying to save him?" That question shook him. He realized he was tying his worth to whether or not Tariq got better. So he changed. He showed up, without scripts, without saving, without the subtle pressure to heal. And in time, Tariq came to him, not because he felt guilt, but because he finally felt safe. That's what influence becomes when it's stripped of expectation. An invitation instead of an ultimatum. You may be wondering, how do I offer influence without needing a specific result? Start here. Check your motives. Ask, would I still say this if nothing changed? I offer, then release. Let go of how they use your truth. Detach your identity from their response. You're not less worthy if they don't shift. Choose love over outcome. Say, I'm here because I care, not because I need to win. Arrest when needed. Non-attachment isn't passive. It's sustainable. Because when you lead from a place of inner fullness, you no longer try to fill others to validate yourself. Here's a reflection. Where in my life am I influencing from pressure instead of peace? If the answer makes you pause, that pause might just be your path back to purpose. Chapter 14. Leading without needing the spotlight. Let me ask you something. Have you ever done something meaningful? Something real? And no one noticed? No applause. No recognition. No thank you. Just silence. And you wondered, did it matter? If you felt that, let me offer you this truth. Leadership is not about visibility. It's about impact. And the most powerful leaders are often the ones the world never sees. We're taught that leadership looks like titles, platforms, followers, being out front. But leadership at its most honest happens in kitchens, in classrooms, in bedrooms after long days, in quiet acts that leave fingerprints, but never signatures. Because influence without spotlight is the kind that often lasts the longest. Let me tell you about Thomas. Thomas was a custodian at a hospital. Every day, he mopped the same floors, cleaned the same windows, emptied the same bins. One day, a nurse noticed he always lingered a few minutes longer in the pediatric cancer wing. When she asked why, he said, "I like to hum softly while I work. It helps the kids sleep." No one had ever asked him to. He wasn't recognized for it. But when that nurse shared his story with the team, dozens of parents said, "That hum helped my child rest. We didn't know who it was, but we felt it." That's leadership. Without lights, without applause, but full of presence. Let's pause here. If you've ever wondered whether your unseen efforts matter, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Your quiet contribution could be someone else's lifeline, even if no one ever tells you that out loud. Here's the truth. Leadership doesn't require attention. It requires alignment. When you lead because it's who you are, not because it makes you look good, you become someone people trust, even when they don't know your name. The spotlight may chase those who crave it, but influence follows those who live it. There's a concept in leadership theory called servant leadership. It flips the hierarchy upside down. It says, you don't lead to be first. You lead to lift. You don't speak to be heard. You speak to help. You don't act for credit. You act from character. And those who lead this way, they build cultures, families, teams that are resilient, human, and whole. Let me tell you about Mina. Mina was a single mom, working 2 jobs. Every night, she read to her kids, even when her body ached, even when the lights flickered with unpaid bills, even when she wanted to cry more than speak. Her daughter once said, "I don't remember the stories she read, but I remember her voice, her presence, the way she never gave up on showing up." That's legacy. That's leadership. Not loud, but lasting. You may be wondering, what does it look like to lead without needing attention? Start here. Lead where you are. You don't need a stage to make an impact. Detach from praise. Let affirmation be a gift, not a requirement. Stay rooted in purpose. Ask, why am I doing this? If the answer is love, you're already enough. Make others the hero. Elevate. Empower. Encourage. Let your work speak. And trust that the right people will notice when it matters most. Because when you don't need the spotlight, your light becomes unmistakable. Here's a reflection. What would I still do with full heart? Even if no one ever clapped for it? Whatever that thing is, that's your true leadership. Live there. Lead there. Love from there. Chapter 15. Being the influence you wish you had. Let me ask you something. Who do you wish had spoken life into you? When you were struggling, who do you wish had seen you? Before you knew how to see yourself? Who do you wish had shown you a different way? When you didn't even know there was one. Most of us can trace our lives back to one of two presences. The person who showed up for us, or the one who didn't. And in that gap, we learn the quiet ache of what we needed but never received. But here's the beautiful part. You can become the influence you never had. You can become the voice you needed. The hand you didn't get. The presence you longed for. And that decision, to give what you were missing, might just change the world around you. Let me tell you about Cyrus. Cyrus grew up in a house where strength meant silence. Where emotions were weakness. Where vulnerability was punished. He became a man who knew how to survive, but didn't know how to connect. Until his son, Micah, turned 9. Sensitive. Curious. Wide-eyed. One night, Micah came into his room and said, "Dad, why do you never tell me how you feel?" Cyrus froze. He wanted to say, "Because I don't know how." But instead, he took a deep breath and replied, "I'm learning, and I want to start with you." That night, for the first time, Cyrus cried in front of his son. Not out of weakness, but because he was choosing to become the influence he never got. That's legacy. That's leadership. That's healing that moves forward without needing to look back. Let's pause here. If you've been carrying the weight of what you didn't receive, please like, subscribe, and share this message. Because someone else is holding the same weight. And you becoming that influence might be the shift they've been waiting for. Here's the truth. Every one of us carries unmet needs. Words we should have heard. Hands we should have held. Examples we should have seen. But pain doesn't have to end where it started. It can be transformed. And that transformation begins the moment you stop asking, "Why didn't anyone show me?" and start asking, "Who can I show now?" Psychologists call this process reparenting. It's the act of giving yourself and others what you were missing. Not from bitterness, but from conscious compassion. You become the encourager you needed, the protector you never had, the listener you longed for, the truth teller you searched for in all the wrong places. And in doing so, you don't just change yourself, you change generations. Let me tell you about Nia. Nia was a teacher in a rough district. Most of her students came from broken homes. Tired eyes. Heavy hearts. Walls up. Every day, Nia wrote one sentence on the board. "You are more than what's happened to you." She didn't lecture. She didn't beg for attention. She just showed up with steady presence and steady truth. Years later, one of her students, now a poet, dedicated his first book to her. For Ms. Nia, who reminded me I was already worth something, even before I believed it. That's what happens when you decide to become the influence. You always needed someone else to be. You may be wondering, where do I begin? Start with this. Speak the words you needed to hear, even if you have to say them to yourself first. Lead with the tenderness you once begged for. People don't forget kindness. Hold space for others, the way you wish someone had held space for you. Forgive the ones who didn't show up. Not for them, but so you can move forward unchained. Choose to give from wholeness, not from the wound. You are not broken. You are becoming. Because when you stop waiting for someone else to be the influence, you become the one. Here's a reflection. What's one sentence I needed to hear that I can now say to someone else Clearly, compassionately, and with conviction? Speak it. To a child. To a friend. To yourself. And keep speaking it. Until that sentence becomes a shift in someone else's story. Chapter 16. The Influence of Letting Go. Let me ask you something. What are you still holding on to? That no longer reflects who you are? A role. A relationship. A belief. A version of yourself you've outgrown. We all carry something past its time. Because letting go feels like losing. But what if letting go isn't about loss? What if it's about making room? Here's the truth. Sometimes the most influential thing you can do isn't to hold tighter, but to release, to unclench, to exhale, to say, I don't have to carry this anymore. And in that space, you don't become smaller. You become free. Let me tell you about Rummy. Rummy was a founder. He built his company from scratch. 15 years of sacrifice. His name on every wall. But over time, the mission changed. The joy faded. And he felt trapped. He didn't want to abandon it. Didn't want to disappoint anyone. Didn't want to let go. Until one morning, journaling before dawn, he wrote, "This isn't who I am anymore. And that doesn't mean I failed. It means I evolved." 6 months later, he handed the company over. Not out of weakness, but out of alignment. And what happened next? He launched a mentorship platform. Something he dreamed of for years, but never had space for. Because the influence he had clung to was blocking the one he was becoming. Let's pause for a moment. If you've been gripping something too long out of fear, take a breath. And if this message is loosening something in you, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Because the courage to let go is often what gives someone else permission to do the same. Letting go isn't passive. It's profoundly active. It says, I trust the next season. I value my peace more than my image. I don't need to carry what no longer feeds me. My influence doesn't have to come from this role, this place, or this identity. And when you let go with grace, you make space for something more honest. In psychology, this process is tied to identity release. We often attach our worth to roles we've played, titles we've earned, personas we've maintained. But growth requires shedding. And shedding isn't failure. It's freedom. Because your influence isn't tied to your old title. It lives in your current truth. Let me tell you about Anya. Anya was the strong one in her family. The fixer. The peacekeeper. The one who never fell apart. But inside, she was exhausted. Every time she wanted to rest, she felt guilt, shame, fear of being seen as too much or not enough. Until one therapy session, she whispered, I'm tired of being strong. Her therapist responded, then let someone hold you. You've earned that too. That day, Anya didn't just cry. She let go of the role, the performance, the pressure. And in doing so, she taught her family something deeper than strength. She taught them honesty. And that became her new influence. Leading through truth, not tension. You may be wondering, how do I know when it's time to let go? Here are some signs. Are you feel resentful more than inspired? Are you staying out of obligation, not alignment? Are you've stopped growing, but keep performing? Are the fear of letting go is the only reason you're staying? Deep down, you already know. Letting go doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. It means choosing authenticity over attachment. And that's a form of leadership the world deeply needs. Here's a practice. Write this sentence and finish it. If I let go of underscore, 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 I would finally feel underscore, 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 underscore. Don't overthink it. Just listen. That's where your next step lives. Chapter 17. The Influence of Stillness in a Loud World. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you sat in true stillness? No noise. No scrolling. No answering. Just you. And your breath. And the hum of what lives beneath the surface. If that question makes you uncomfortable, you're not alone. We live in a world addicted to volume. To urgency. to proving, to doing. But what if stillness isn't a luxury? What if it's a form of leadership? Here's the truth. Stillness isn't emptiness. It's alignment. It's listening. It's clarity. Stillness doesn't mean you have nothing to say. It means you don't need to say everything right now. And in that pause, you become powerful. Because while others are reacting, you are rooting. While others are chasing noise, you are cultivating presence. Let me tell you about Lena. Lena was the COO of a global company. Meetings, metrics, movement, constantly. But every morning, before the noise began, she sat in her garden for 20 minutes. No phone, no laptop, just breath. She called it her quiet recalibration. One day, after a difficult board meeting, a new hire asked her, "How did you stay so calm while everyone else was spiraling?" Lena smiled and said, "Because I wasn't listening to them. I was listening to me. And that voice? I hear it every morning." That's what stillness builds. Not performance, but power. Let's pause here. If you've been feeling overwhelmed by the volume of the world, take a breath. And if this chapter is helping you reclaim some of your stillness, please like, subscribe, and share the channel. Your peace is not weakness. It's your anchor. Stillness isn't just for the monks and the mystics. It's for leaders, creators, parents, partners, humans who want to lead lives that mean something. Stillness teaches you to respond instead of react, to choose instead of chase, to discern instead of drown. It slows the spinning world, long enough for you to hear your own wisdom. And that wisdom, that's where influence is born. There's a psychological principle called interoception. It's your ability to notice what's happening inside your body. Heartbeat, breath, tension, instinct. Stillness strengthens it. And when you can feel yourself, you can trust yourself. And when you trust yourself, your influence no longer needs to shout. It simply is. Let me tell you about Mason. Mason worked in crisis response. He was called in when things fell apart. People expected urgency, speed, quick action. But Mason always did the same thing first. He sat a day, silent, breathing, centering. Someone once asked him, "Why are you so calm in chaos?" He answered, "Because if I can't find stillness inside myself, I'll just add to the noise." That's how he earned trust. Not with pressure, but with presence. You may be wondering, how do I cultivate stillness in a world that doesn't stop? Here's how. Start with 5 minutes a day. Sit. No goals. Just breathe. And notice your thoughts without grabbing them. Let them float. You're not here to fix. Disconnect to reconnect. 1 hour without your phone. Let silence speak. Create pause rituals. Before meetings. Before conversations. Before decisions. Listen more than you speak. Let silence do some of the heavy lifting. Because stillness isn't about being absent. It's about being fully present. Here's a reflection. Where in my life have I confused noise for progress? And what might happen if I let stillness lead instead? Sit with that. Don't rush. Let the answer come like a whisper, not a wave. Chapter 18. Influence rooted in compassion, not control. Let me ask you something. Have you ever tried to help someone, only to realize you were trying to control them? You didn't mean to. Your heart was in the right place. But somewhere along the way, your support started sounding like a script, and your love started to feel like pressure. It happens to the best of us, because caring deeply can blur the line between compassion and control. But real influence, lasting, trusted, transformative influence, is rooted in compassion, not control. Here's the truth. Control says, "I know what's best for you." Compassion says, "I'm here with you, no matter what you choose." Control pushes. Compassion walks beside. Control demands change. Compassion invites it. And people don't open when they are pushed. They open when they feel safe. That's what compassion creates. Emotional permission. And in that space, influence begins to bloom. Let me tell you about Rebecca. Rebecca's daughter, Jade, was battling an eating disorder. Rebecca tried everything: doctor's visits, meal plans, late-night talks that turned into arguments. Until one day, Jade said through tears, "I know you love me, but it feels like you're trying to fix me, not hold me." That broke something open. From that moment forward, Rebecca changed her approach. No more ultimatums. No more panic. No more control. Instead, she sat with her, listened, asked questions, let silence exist without needing to solve it. That didn't fix everything, but it changed everything, because Jade finally felt seen, not as a project, but as a person. Let's pause here. If this chapter is helping you release the pressure to fix, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Sometimes the most powerful way to support someone is simply to be with them as they are. There's a concept in trauma-informed psychology called unconditional positive regard. It's the practice of offering care, presence, and respect, without needing the other person to change first. It doesn't mean enabling harmful behavior. It means refusing to make love conditional on performance. This creates trust. And trust is where real change begins. Because when people feel safe enough to be real, they become willing to grow. Not because they were pushed, but because they were held. Let me tell you about James. James led a recovery group. He had decades of sobriety, wisdom, and experience. But when newcomers joined his circle, he never lectured. He asked questions. He shared his truth. He let silence be part of the room. One night, a man said, "I've been to 5 other groups. This is the first time I didn't feel ashamed for showing up." James smiled and replied, "That's because we don't lead from rules here. We lead from remembrance. We've all been where you are." That's what compassion sounds like when it finds its voice. You may be wondering, how do I stay compassionate when I care so deeply that I want to do something? Here's how. Ask before offering. Would you like advice, or just someone to sit with you? Let their timing lead. Healing isn't linear. Growth isn't instant. Speak truth with tenderness. You can be clear and kind. Name what's yours to carry, and what isn't. Compassion doesn't mean self-abandonment. Remember, influence is a seed. Plant it with care, and let it take root when it's ready. Because the influence rooted in compassion doesn't rush the process. It respects it. Here's a reflection. Where in my life have I been trying to love someone by controlling them? And what would shift if I chose to love them by trusting them instead? Write it down. Breathe into it. Then soften. That softness is not weakness. It's your power. Chapter 19. The courage to influence yourself first. Let me ask you something. When you speak to others, do your words match how you treat yourself? When you encourage them to rest, are you resting? When you tell them they're enough, do you believe you are? When you guide them to slow down, speak up, let go, are you guiding yourself? 2. We talk a lot about leading others. But here's the truth. You can't sustainably influence others if you're neglecting the influence you have over yourself. Self-influence is where real leadership begins. Not with discipline, but with honesty. Not with control, but with self-trust. Not with performance, but with alignment. Because you can say all the right things, but if your life contradicts your message, people won't feel your influence. And worse, you won't believe your own voice. Let me tell you about Dana. Dana was a coach. She helped high performers create balanced lives. She spoke about boundaries, about self-care, about listening to your body. But behind the scenes, she worked 70-hour weeks, skipped meals, said yes to clients she wanted to say no to, until one evening, after a retreat, she collapsed from exhaustion. In the quiet, she asked herself, would I ever want one of my clients to live the way I'm living? The answer was a gut punch. So she changed. Not her job, but her example. She cut her schedule in half, said no with grace, started walking her truth instead of just talking it. And something unexpected happened. Her clients began growing faster. Because now, they didn't just hear her. They watched her. That's the difference between a message and a model. Let's pause here. If you've been telling others the truth while silently ignoring your own, please like, subscribe, and share this message. You're not a fraud. You're just tired of the gap between your values and your reality. And today, you can start to close it. Self-influence is an act of radical self-respect. It's asking yourself, am I living like I matter? 2. Do I treat my time like it's precious? Do I keep the promises I make to myself, or just the ones I make to others? Do I walk the values I teach? Because here's the truth. People don't follow your advice. They follow your example. And your most loyal follower should be you. There's a practice in psychology called self-regulation. It's your ability to guide your own behavior from the inside. To soothe, to notice, to redirect, to realign. It's what gives you the strength to pause before reacting, to rest before burning out, to change your story before your story breaks you. And it's also what makes your influence believable. Because a person who can guide themselves earns the right to guide others. Let me tell you about Kale. Kale was a youth speaker, charismatic, inspiring, always on the go. He told teens to love themselves, to build their future, to stay grounded. But in private, he was struggling with addiction to productivity and afraid of being still. One night, he said out loud to the mirror, "I'm teaching them courage, but I haven't had the courage to be alone with myself." That was the beginning. He took a sabbatical, started therapy, let his mask drop, and when he returned to the stage, he didn't come back with perfect answers. He came back whole, and his voice carried something new, something heavier than charisma. It carried integrity. You may be wondering, how do I start influencing myself when I've been focused on everyone else? Here's how. Audit your habits. Ask, would I recommend this to someone I love? Close the gap. Align your words and actions, one small promise at a time. Talk to yourself the way you speak to others. With empathy, with hope, with truth. Honor your limits. Rest isn't laziness, it's leadership. Let your own growth matter to you. Not for proof, not for others, just for you. Because when your life matches your message, you become undeniable. Here's a reflection. If someone watched only how I treat myself, what would they learn about self-worth? Let that answer guide your next step. Let it reshape how you move. Let it remind you, you are not just a messenger. You are the message. Chapter 20. The Legacy of Honest Influence. Let me ask you one last thing. What will be remembered when you're no longer in the room? Not your resume. Not your follower count. Not the loudest thing you ever said. But the way people felt in your presence. The way you led without pushing. The way your life whispered truth, instead of shouting for attention. That is legacy. And legacy isn't built by being the most persuasive. It's built by being the most authentic. Here's the truth. Influence without manipulation isn't flashy. It's not always fast. And it may not win you the biggest crowd. But it will win you something deeper. It will win you peace, respect, trust, and a life you don't have to perform inside of. That kind of influence, it outlives trends. It outlasts noise. It echoes. Let me tell you about Yora. Yora was never on a stage. She didn't lead companies. She didn't go viral. But in her community, she was known as the one you went to when life fell apart. Because Yora didn't just give advice. She gave presence. She remembered names. She spoke softly. She made every person feel like they were the only one in the room. At her funeral, hundreds came. People who hadn't seen her in decades. People who only met her once. One woman said, "She didn't save my life with a speech. She saved it by sitting next to me in the hospital and holding my hand for 5 hours. That's the influence I'll never forget." That's legacy. Not created in a moment, but in the quiet, faithful rhythm of who you are when no one is watching. Let's pause for the final time. If this book has reminded you of who you are, of who you're becoming, of how you want to move through this world, please like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs it. Because honest influence grows strongest when it's shared heart to heart. You may be wondering, how do I leave behind a legacy that reflects truth, not ego? Start here. Choose clarity over charisma. Say what matters, not just what impresses. Value connection over control. Let people be moved, not managed. Let your actions speak for you. Consistency is influence. Build trust more than applause. Applause fades. Trust stays. Alive, so aligned that your absence still inspires presence. Because legacy isn't what you build. It's what you leave behind in others. Let me tell you about Nathan and his daughter, May. Nathan wasn't expressive. Didn't say I love you often. Didn't leave long letters or big speeches. But every night, he put a folded blanket by her door. Every Sunday, he cooked the same breakfast. Every time she called, he picked up. When he passed, May didn't cry over what he said. She cried over how he showed up. She told her friends, I want to be the kind of person whose love is felt, even when the words are quiet. That's the kind of influence that doesn't need to be explained. It's felt in the bones. Here's your final reflection. If my life were a message, what would it say? Would it say be louder? Or be true? Would it say win them over? Or meet them where they are? Would it say follow me? Or follow yourself, and I'll walk beside you? Let that message shape your next step. Let it become the thread that runs through your conversations, your choices, your presence, because that thread will outlast everything else. Thank you for walking this path, and more importantly, thank you for leading it.